Welcome, everyone. We're diving into some really provocative ideas about the origins of the Book of Acts today.
Absolutely. So, the theory being discussed here is that the Book of Acts isn't really what it appears to be at first glance, right?
Right, exactly. The argument here is that Acts wasn't actually written by Luke, the trusted companion of Paul, but rather it might have been penned much later, like between 115 and 140 CE,
Mm-hmm.
which means it's a lot later than most folks believe.
And that timeline shift really turns everything upside down, doesn't it? The idea is that rather than acting as a genuine eyewitness account, Acts is more of a crafted narrative aimed at controlling the story of early Christianity.
Precisely. It's like instead of preserving the real history, it was written to erase and even overwrite actual historical truths, aiming to cover up the
Yep.
true, raw narrative of the early church.
So, the implication is that what we're told about Luke's proximity to Paul and his role as a historian may just be a clever construction?
Exactly. It suggests that the canonical Luke and Acts were, in fact, written as counter-narratives. They were designed as a direct reaction to voices like Marcion of Sinope, who, incidentally, had his own quite radical gospel circulating around 110-120 CE, which is pretty mind-opening when you consider it.
Right. So this Marcion guy had a gospel that stripped away a lot of the traditional Jewish elements, like the virgin birth and genealogies, right?
Yes, exactly. Marcion's version was all about a message of radical grace from a higher, almost alien God. Something starkly different from the gospel that includes the law and prophets. It was a very different spiritual vision, almost like stripping down the story to its bare essentials.
And in response, the Proto-Orthodox Church felt threatened, which led to them rewriting the story to align more with Jewish traditions, correct?
Exactly. The Church, rather than engaging in a robust debate with Marcion's teachings, decided to essentially rewrite the narrative. They reinserted the Jewish elements to make their gospel more palatable to the broader audience and legitimize their authority.
Yeah.
It was a strategic move.
It really seems like a classic case of controlling the narrative by rebranding the past.
Definitely. And think about Paul for a moment. The real Paul, as seen in his authentic letters, is depicted as assertive, even combative at times. He's the guy who proclaims that he didn't receive the gospel from any man,
Right.
someone with a fiercely independent streak.
But then Acts comes in, transforming him into an almost tamed, submissive figure who is constantly checking in with James and Peter. It's like they made him a team player rather than the radical individual he was.
Exactly. There's this striking contrast between the rebellious Paul we see in his letters and the sanitized version in Acts. And the omission of key details, like any mention of Paul's own letters or first-hand dramatics such as shipwrecks or visionary experiences, really compounds the mystery, which raises a lot of questions about why those elements were so conveniently left out.
Now, I get the argument that Acts might have been written to strategically rehabilitate Paul's image for the church's purposes, but isn't that a bit of an overreach? I mean, can we be so sure that it wasn't just a different style of storytelling?
That's a fair critique. It is a bold claim to say it's a complete fabrication. However, scholars like Richard Pervo, Joseph Tyson, and Jason BeDuhn back this theory by pointing to the literary style, vocabulary, and the overall theological agenda in Acts that seems to squarely place it in the 2nd century. They argue that these stylistic choices aren't incidental, they're deliberate.
So, in their view, Acts serves not just as a historical account, but as a piece of anti-Marcionite propaganda, a means to discredit Marcion by rewriting the timeline of events.
Exactly. The evidence suggests that while Marcion's gospel was the original, more radical version, the Church felt the need to stamp out that narrative. Acts, alongside canonical Luke, becomes a vehicle for that. It was all about repackaging the gospel to align with the institutional agenda of the time. That's the pretty radical twist here.
It almost sounds like a historical cover-up, like the church was so concerned about maintaining a certain orthodoxy that they essentially rewrote history.
Precisely. The idea is that Acts was less about recording eyewitness testimony and more about constructing a narrative that would support church authority. It's about making Paul the obedient apostle rather than the independent critic we read about in his letters, so shaping history to suit their needs.
And that brings up another intriguing point, the glaring silence in Acts about Paul's own writings. If someone claimed to have journeyed with Paul, why would they completely ignore a whole body of work he produced?
That's exactly one of the most shocking omissions. It's like writing a biography of Shakespeare but not mentioning any of his plays. It definitely calls into question the authorship and authenticity of Acts. It's hard to fathom such a huge oversight in a historical account.
It really is, and it supports the notion that Acts was more a retrospective fabrication than a genuine historical document.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's the political context. The early church was battling a number of heretical movements like Marcionism, Gnosticism, and Montanism. The creation of Acts can be seen as a strategic move to unify and control the divergent factions by rewriting their common origins, a sort of central narrative to counter the chaos.
So, would you say this whole reinterpretation of Paul's image, the deliberate omissions, and the style all point towards a constructed history rather than an accidental evolution of the narrative?
That's exactly the argument. The artifice in Acts seems too deliberate to be a mere stylistic variant. It was a calculated response designed to cement the authority of the church while sidelining any alternative, more radical interpretations of Paul's life and teachings.
Yeah.
It's like they weren't just telling a story. They were shaping a whole ideology.
And isn't it fascinating how history can be manipulated? It makes you wonder about the origins of many accepted narratives and how much editorial work goes into, rewriting the past.
Definitely. It invites us to continuously reevaluate historical documents and question established truths, especially when so much is at stake in terms of power and control. It really gives you a whole new perspective on what many consider to be sacred history.
But here's a challenge. If we start questioning these foundational texts like this, isn't there a risk of, undermining faith or destabilizing long-held beliefs?
That's an excellent point. There's always a tension between historical inquiry and faith-based traditions. Yet, these discussions aren't necessarily about discarding faith, but understanding that sometimes institutional narratives have been shaped for reasons far beyond simple historical accuracy. It's more about contextualizing rather than simply rejecting everything.
True. And knowing these counter-narratives can make the conversation richer. It's kind of like peeling back layers of an old myth, isn't it?
Exactly. It's like unwrapping a story that's been carefully packaged only to reveal that there was editorial oversight, intentional even, at every turn. It definitely makes you think twice about what you've always assumed.
And isn't it also intriguing how, once this perspective takes hold, it forces us to reconsider the very foundations of church authority? If Acts is a constructed retrospective work, then so much of what we believe about early Christianity might be built on a carefully crafted narrative.
Precisely. The argument here is not just academic. It has real implications for how we understand the evolution of religious identity and authority. It challenges the notion that the early church's story is a pristine record of events. It might very well be a cover-up that reshaped history to suit a particular agenda. Yeah. It turns conventional wisdom on its head.
And this, in turn, makes history both fascinating and dangerous, doesn't it? I mean, if our foundational texts can be rewritten like this, then how do we sift through what's genuine?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It requires us to look critically at established narratives and to be aware of the context in which these documents were produced. Without that, we risk accepting a potentially skewed portrayal of our past. It really emphasizes the importance of historiography and critical study.
Right. So, to wrap this up, it seems the theory here invites us to rethink. Who really wrote Acts? And to what end?
Absolutely. It suggests that Acts isn't a straightforward historical record, but a carefully edited narrative designed to control the theological and political direction of early Christianity. It's a compelling call to always question and dig deeper into the texts we hold sacred. It truly casts a new light on what many take for granted as historical fact.
Thanks for this fascinating discussion. It definitely leaves us with a lot to ponder about the origins of these influential texts and, how we interpret our history.
Thank you, and remember, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop seeking the deeper truth hidden beneath the layers of history.